The Hall of Infinite Accord was a masterpiece of alien precision, a vaulted chamber of shimmering, self-repairing alloy, its walls etched with the legal codes of 1,000 species, each character glowing faintly as if lit by some unseen cosmic justice. The air hummed with the sterile scent of ozone and authority, a scent that had never, in 7 millennia of interstellar governance, been disrupted by anything as inconvenient as disorder. High Arbiter Zyxlith of the Galactic Arbitration Tribunal floated into the chamber atop a gravity disk, their elongated, segmented body draped in robes woven from the legal texts of conquered civilizations. Their 4 compound eyes reflected the assembled dignitaries, each species seated in perfect, geometric rows, their postures radiating the solemnity of beings who had never once questioned the sanctity of bureaucracy. Today, Zyxlith intoned, their voice a harmonic oscillation designed to convey finality, we address the anomaly known as Homo sapiens. A ripple of distaste passed through the assembly. The V-30 delegates coiled their tentacles tighter. The K-Thuran's crystalline carapaces dimmed in disapproval, and the Nyxandran heads swiveled in perfect synchronized disdain. At the center of the chamber, standing alone on a platform conspicuously devoid of gravitic enhancement, was Elias Vance. His hair was tousled, his posture relaxed, and worst of all, he was smiling. Ambassador Vance, Zyxlith said, mandibles clicking in irritation, you stand before this tribunal to answer for humanity's chaotic disruption of galactic order. Where is your legal delegation? Vance blinked. Oh, I figured I'd handle this myself. Less paperwork. A murmur of disbelief. Legal representation was not optional. It was sacred. Zyxlith's antennae twitched. This is unprecedented. Vance shrugged. So's humanity. The High Arbiter's exoskeleton vibrated with barely contained frustration. Very well. Let the record show that the accused has voluntarily forfeited proper counsel. They gestured, and the chamber's central holodisplay flickered to life, projecting a meticulously curated montage of human history. Wars waged over invisible borders, economies collapsing because of belief in value, art that defied all known aesthetic algorithms, music that changed tempo mid-composition. Exhibit A, Zyxlith declared. Humanity's inability to conform to predictable societal structures. Vance tilted his head. You say that like it's a bad thing. It is, Zyxlith snapped. The galactic order is built upon stability, upon rules. And yet, Vance mused, here we are, alive, thriving, despite, or maybe because of, all that chaos. A junior arbiter near the back, K-Trix, a lithe, silver-scaled jurist from the outer systems, leaned forward, their ocular ridges narrowing in something dangerously close to curiosity. Zyxlith ignored them. The tribunal proposes immediate categorization of humanity under Galactic Oversight Directive 47B, sentience requiring civilizational containment. Vance whistled. That's a mouthful. What's it mean? It means, Zyxlith said, mandible spreading in what might have been a smile, you will be regulated. The chamber hummed with approval. This was how it had always been done. This was order. Vance scratched his chin. See, here's the thing. Regulations imply predictability. And humans? He grinned. We invented loopholes. Then, from the back, a single stifled laugh. K-Trix quickly covered their mouth, but the damage was done. The sanctity of the tribunal had been breached. Zyxlith's exoskeleton darkened with fury. This proceeding is adjourned for recess. We will reconvene in one standard cycle, with proper deference to protocol. As the assembly dispersed in a flurry of disapproving clicks and hisses, Vance remained on the platform, hands in pockets, watching the retreating forms of the galaxy's most powerful beings. K-Trix lingered just a moment too long. their silver scales catching the light as they cast one last unreadable glance at the human. Vance winked. The Arbiter vanished into the crowd. Alone now, Vance exhaled, his breath fogging the pristine air of the Hall of Infinite Accord. "All right, Earth," he muttered. "Let's see how many laws we can break without moving." And with that, he pulled out a thermos, actual primitive metal, and took a long, deliberate sip of coffee. Somewhere in the depths of the Tribunal's archives, an ancient legal algorithm short-circuited. The Hall of Infinite Accord hummed with the low-frequency vibration of 1,000 legal protocols activating at once. High Arbiter Zyxlith's carapace gleamed under the chamber's sterile light as they rose from their RI, a floating disk of polished Vithrium, the hardest known substance in the galaxy, because of course the Council's furniture had to flex like that. "Representative Vance," Zyxlith intoned, their voice a symphony of clipped syllables and subharmonic disapproval. "The Galactic Arbitration Tribunal has convened to address the problem of humanity." Elias Vance leaned back in his decidedly non-floating, non-Vithrium chair, just plain earth oak, because Head insisted on bringing his own, and took another sip from his thermos. The sound of him swallowing echoed in the sudden silence. "Problem?" Vance repeated, eyebrows lifting. "That's a strong word." Zyxlith's mandibles twitched. Behind them, the chamber's walls shimmered, projecting a holographic montage of human history, cities burning, stock markets crashing, a man in a chicken suit arguing with a traffic camera. "Exhibit A," Zyxlith declared. "Your species engages in conflict over imaginary lines." The hologram zoomed in on a battlefield, then a map, then a screaming politician waving a flag. "Exhibit B, your economic systems collapse because you believe they will." Exhibit C, your art. The hologram flickered to a banana duct taped to a wall, defies all categorization. A murmur rippled through the assembled arbiters. Junior Arbiter Catrix, a spindly bioluminescent being from the Six's cluster, leaned forward, their tendrils pulsing with curiosity. Vance set down his thermos with a deliberate clink. "Hi, Arbiter. With respect, you're describing culture." Zyxlith's four eyes narrowed. "Culture is predictable. This is chaos." "Chaos?" Vance chuckled. "No. This is adaptation." He stood, rolling up his sleeves, a gesture that made several arbiters flinch, as if he might produce a weapon. Instead, he gestured at the hologram. "You see war? We see negotiation by other means. Market crashes, creative destruction. The banana?" He shrugged. "Okay, that's just weird. But weird is how we learn." Zyxlith's carapace darkened, a sign of agitation. "Your learning destabilizes entire sectors. Your learning destabilizes entire sectors." The Rigel Compact has filed 7 complaints about human entrepreneurs selling them financial instruments that do not exist. Vance's grin was razor sharp. "Ah, the Rigelians. Did they ever get their tulip bulbs delivered?" Catrix made a sound like a stifled giggle. Zyxlith shot them a glare. "Enough," Zyxlith snapped. "The tribunal proposes strict oversight. A regulatory framework to curb this evolutionary hazard." Vance's smile didn't waver, but his voice dropped, smooth as a chess player sliding a pawn forward. "Hi, Arbiter. Has it occurred to you that your framework might not account for dynamism?" Catrix bioluminescence flickered. Zyxlith's mandibles froze mid-click. Vance pressed on. "Your laws assume stability. Ours thrive on change. You call it disorder. We call it survival." He paused, then delivered the needle. "But if your system can't measure it, can it really judge it?" The chamber's ambient temperature dropped by 2 degrees. Somewhere in the tribunal's archives, another legal algorithm sputtered and died. Zyxlith recovered first. "Your rhetoric is irrelevant. The evidence stands." "One, does it?" Vance reached into his pocket. Every arbiter tensed. He pulled out a smartphone. "Let's test that." With a tap, the hologram shifted. Now it showed Earth's recovery from disasters. cities rebuilt after earthquakes, scientists collaborating across borders, a viral dance challenge uniting teenagers on 6 continents. Exhibit D, Vance said softly. We adapt faster than you can legislate. K-Trix tendrils were practically vibrating now. Zixlith looked like they wanted to vaporize the smartphone on principle. The moment hung delicate as a soap bubble. Then Vance pocketed the phone and sat back down. So? Problem, he said. The chamber erupted into whispered debates. Zixlith's grip on the sage tightened. And in the shadows, K-Trix began quietly downloading every human legal precedent they could find. The recess bell chimed, a crystalline antiseptic sound that made Elias Vance's teeth ache. Around him, the chamber dissolved into murmurs, the alien arbiters retreating into their respective cliques like mercury splitting into droplets. Zixlith had already vanished into a private consultation pod, their carapace rigid with irritation. Vance exhaled, rolling his shoulders. The first round had been a draw, but he could work with that. He wandered toward the archives, ostensibly to review the evidence logs, but really to escape the suffocating scrutiny of a dozen unblinking alien eyes. The Galactic Legal Codex terminals hummed softly, their interfaces projecting holograms in a script that looked like fractals having a nervous breakdown. Vance squinted, tapping the translation overlay on his wrist pad. And then he saw it. Any species demonstrating irreducible complexity in social structures may petition for self-governance under Article 7X, provided said complexity cannot be resolved through standardized categorization protocols. Vance's pulse spiked. The clause was ancient, drafted for species whose consciousnesses were distributed across trillions of nodes, impossible to regulate as discrete entities. But the wording was beautifully vague. E flicked through Earth's case files on the adjacent screen. Images of stock markets crashing and rebounding, protest movements fractalizing into 100 splinter factions, memes mutating across languages in hours. All of it had been presented as proof of human disorder, but framed differently. A shadow fell across the terminal. Junior Arbiter K-Trix loomed behind him, their elongated limbs folded in what might have been curiosity. "You are researching?" they intoned, the translator rendering their clicks as careful neutrality. "Wante asses." Vance didn't turn. "Just admiring your legal system's thoroughness." He zoomed in on a footnote about overlapping jurisdictional paradoxes. K-Trix antennae twitched. "That provision applies only to collective consciousnesses, does it?" Vance finally looked up, grinning. "Because last I checked, the Codex doesn't define irreducible complexity, just mandates that it can't be standardized. And human governments? We've got democracies that elect poets, corporations that own cities, and at least 3 micronations run by house cats. If that's not irreducible, I don't know what is." K-Trix exoskeleton emitted a subvocal hum, their version of a thoughtful sigh. "You intend to invoke this, wouldn't you?" Vance leaned back. "Look, I get it. The Council loves order. But humanity? We thrive in the gaps. And this?" He tapped the clause. "This is a gap big enough to drive a revolution through." Zixlith's return was heralded by a wave of stiff silence. The High Arbiter took their mandibles, clicking in disapproval as Vance sauntered back to his seat. "The tribunal reconvenes," Zixlith announced. "Ambassador Vance, the Council has reviewed your unorthodox defense. We remain unconvinced." Vance interlaced his fingers. "What if I told you human societies can't be destabilized because they're designed to fluctuate?" He gestured to the holograms now blooming above him. New York's overlapping borough laws, the Byzantine tax codes of medieval Venice, the fact that Scotland had once legally declared war on a seabird colony. This isn't chaos, it's layered complexity. And under Article 7X, that qualifies us for self-governance. Zixlith's carapace darkened. Preposterous. That statute was never intended for. Or just criteria? The chamber erupted. Alien voices overlapped in a cacophony of clicks and whistles. One arbiter's frills flushed ultraviolet with outrage. Another began vibrating at a frequency that shattered a nearby data crystal. K-Trix stood. "High Arbiter," they said, their voice cutting through the noise. "The human's interpretation is technically correct." Zixlith's claws dented the armrests of their Hane. "Then the codex is incorrect," Vance smirked. "Funny. I thought the law was absolute." In the ensuing uproar, nobody noticed K-Trix quietly flagging the session for public broadcast, or the way Vance's fingers danced over his wrist pad, sending a single encrypted message back to Earth. "Start drafting the paperwork," and maybe trademark Article 7X as a band name. The game had just changed, and the best part, the council hadn't even realized they were playing. The chamber's acoustics, designed to amplify the measured cadence of interstellar law, now threw Vance's words back at the council like an echo of impending disaster. "By the authority of Article 7X of the Galactic Legal Codex," he announced, his voice deceptively mild, "humanity formally petitions for recognition as an irreducibly complex social structure, thereby exempt from standard regulatory oversight." A hush fell, not the dignified silence of deliberation, but the stunned quiet of a system encountering an error it couldn't parse. High Arbiter Zixlith's primary eye stalks stiffened, their usual rhythmic sway frozen mid-motion. Behind him, the holographic displays flickered, their orderly columns of legal text dissolving into frantic glyphs as the tribunal's AI scrambled to reconcile Vance's claim with millennia of precedent. "This is absurd," Zixlith finally hissed, his vocal membranes vibrating with barely suppressed outrage. Article 7X was drafted for the V-Thury hive mind. Its parameters explicitly require a social system that cannot be simplified without loss of essential function, Vance finished, tapping his wrist pad. A hologram bloomed above the central dais, a tangled web of human governance, overlapping jurisdictions, contradictory laws, and subcultures that defied categorization. "At least they have one queen." Junior Arbiter K-Trix's secondary claws twitched, a telltale sign of suppressed fascination. Their species, the Nyxandra, prized equilibrium above all, yet here was a life form that thrived on disequilibrium. "The petitioner raises an intriguing point," they ventured, earning a glare from Zixlith. "If our laws cannot model human systems, how can we enforce?" "Preposterous!" The V-Thury delegates' tentacles lashed, their bioluminescence flaring crimson. "Next you'll claim their art has legal standing," Vance grinned. "Funny you should mention that." Another tap? The hologram shifted to display a montage, Dadaist manifestos, Banks's shredded painting, a viral deepfake of Zixlith singing show tunes. Human creativity operates on derivative works and fair use, concepts your copyright statutes don't account for. Imagine trying to regulate that. The chamber erupted. The Kaith Moran Arbiter's crystalline carapaces clattered like falling dominoes as they conferred. Zixlith slammed a bioluminescent tendril on the resonance plate, silencing the chaos. "Enough! The tribunal will recess to—" "Ashley," Vance interjected, "Article 14B mandates immediate preliminary ruling when prima facie evidence meets codex criteria." He shrugged. "But if you'd prefer to violate procedure—" A lethal pause. Had baited them into it. Very well, Zyxlith spat. The tribunal acknowledges the petition. However, Vance murmured, just loud enough for the microphones to catch. I'd hate to see what happens when other species realize they might qualify. The Agari with their caste-based paradoxes, the Quill with their non-linear inheritance laws. K-Trix, central head snapped toward him, eyes wide. The unspoken implication hung in the air. This wasn't just about humanity, it was a virus. As the council descended into frantic sidebar debates, Vance leaned back, watching the chaos unfold with the serene satisfaction of a man who just set fire to a library of sacred texts and ensured them first. Behind him, the public gallery's holographic feeds glowed brighter. Every word was being broadcast live. Somewhere in the galaxy, a dozen oppressed species were taking notes. The chamber's acoustics, usually calibrated to amplify the measured cadence of interstellar law, now carried the frantic whispers of the Galactic Council like the buzzing of a disturbed hive. High Arbiter Zyxlith's primary ocular ridge twitched, a telltale sign of distress among the Vaethuri, as the implications of Vance's legal gambit settled over the assembly. The human stood at the center of the storm, hands clasped behind his back, studying the holographic projections of the legal codex as if admiring a particularly clever piece of graffiti. Irreducible complexity, Zyxlith muttered, the words tasting like spoiled nutrient paste. The term had been meant for the elegant, predictable hierarchies of the Cafe Moran hive minds, not this tangled mess of human governance. Junior Arbiter K-Trix, their exoskeleton flickering with poorly suppressed excitement, leaned forward. High Arbiter, if Article 7X applies, our precedent in the Malaxian consensus case suggests. Irrelevant. Zyxlith's vocal sac inflated, vibrating with authority. Humanity's so-called complexity is disorder masquerading as sophistication. They change leaders like a pirate swaps docking codes. Vance cleared his throat. With respect, High Arbiter, that's precisely the point. Our systems adapt. Yours, he gestured to the towering legal archives lining the chamber, seemed to resist it. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Somewhere in the back, a Nixandra delegate's secondary head snickered before the primary hissed it into silence. Zyxlith's tentacles coiled tight. Deadlock was unacceptable. The council's authority relied on resolution, on finality. But Vance had turned their own laws into quicksand. Very well, Zyxlith said, mandibles clicking in reluctant concession. A probationary period. Humanity may retain self-governance under minimal oversight, pending review of your unique societal structures. Vance's eyebrows lifted in theatrical surprise. Oversight? Define minimal. Standard cultural exchange protocols, Zyxlith snapped. Ambassadorial observers. Routine audits. Routine audits. Vance suppressed a grin. The council's idea of routine involved 17 forms just to approve a lunch menu. But the vagueness was a gift, a crack in the door. He sighed, feigning resignation. If that's the only compromise on the table, Earth accepts. K-Trix waited precisely 4.3 standard cycles, the time it took for Zyxlith to retreat to their chambers and the media feeds to cycle to peak viewership, before forwarding the session logs to every major galactic news hub. The headline wrote itself. Humanity declared too complex to regulate, Council capitulates to primates. By dawn, the story had metastasized. The pirate syndicates, long chafing under trade restrictions, began drafting petitions citing irreducible complexity in their supply chains. The All-Right Collective, a fringe group of anarchist philosophers, declared themselves a fluid cognitive network and demanded Article 7X protections. And, in a dimly lit cafe on the edge of council space, a disgraced Malaxian scholar watched the feeds, their neural filaments alight with possibility. Zixlith realized their mistake 3 rotations later, when the first formal challenge arrived from the Kaith Moran's third hive mind faction, arguing their sub-colony dissonance qualified under the human precedent. Then came the V-30 separatists, then the Nixandra's labor unions. The High Arbiters stared at the mounting petitions, their usually immaculate tentacles frayed at the tips. This is untenable. Catrix, now flanked by junior arbiters who'd suddenly developed opinions, tilted their cranial plate. With all due respect, High Arbiter, the law is clear. If humanity's chaos is legally irreducible, then so is everyone else's, Zixlith finished, the horror dawning. Across the chamber, Vance adjusted his cuffs, the ghost of a smirk playing at his lips. Somewhere on Earth, a bureaucrat was already drafting paperwork to tax extraterrestrial memes. The galaxy would never be the same. The chamber of the Interstellar Arbitration Tribunal, once a hallowed hall of crystalline order, now buzzed with the kind of frenetic energy usually reserved for Earth stock market crashes. High Arbiter Zixlith's carapace-like plating had taken on a dull, ashen hue, a physiological tell among his species for abject humiliation. His 4 primary limbs twitched as junior arbiters scurried around him, their data slates overflowing with urgent petitions from a dozen newly emboldened species. The Vithuri Collective has filed for self-governance under Article 7X, droned a harried aide, their voice modulator crackling under stress, citing artistic irreducibility. They've included, interpretive dance as evidence. Zixlith's eye stalk swiveled toward Elias Vance, who lounged in the human delegation's seat, sipping from a suspiciously Earth-like thermos. The scent of coffee, a substance the Galactic Council had once classified as a mild neurotoxin, wafted through the chamber. "This is your doing," Zixlith hissed, his vocal sac inflating with barely contained fury. Vance set down the thermos with a deliberate click. "High Arbiter, I merely pointed out a pre-existing clause in your legal code. If the V-Theory want to argue that their tentacle sculptures are as legally uncategorizable as human tax laws, well," he shrugged. "That's the beauty of irreducible complexity. It's irreducible." Across the room, Junior Arbiter Catrix's bioluminescent markings flickered in what humans might call a smirk. Their once muted fascination with human creative compliance had blossomed into outright rebellion. Leaked tribunal transcripts now circulated through the galactic net, repackaged as viral entertainment. A particularly popular clip showed Zixlith short-circuiting when Vance mentioned limited liability corporations. The fallout was spectacular. On Xyrilus Prime, the hive mind Melnari, previously model subjects of council oversight, declared themselves a collective of individually chaotic artistic souls and promptly started a punk rock movement. Their first single, Zixlith is a proto-fascist fossil, topped the interstellar charts. The Cathoron, crystalline bureaucrats who drafted Article 7X as a niche provision for hyper-efficient hive minds, now watched in horror as their own clerks unionized, citing human-style labor solidarity. What? Yeah. A Vithuri artist's rendering of Zixlith as a flailing earth octopus, 8 limbs of oppression, became the most shared image in galactic history. Human social media platforms, suddenly flooded with alien users, buckled under the weight of interspecies trolling. Zixlith stood before the council for the last time, his once gleaming carapace now scuffed from protesters hurling organic compost, reed, space manure at his shuttle. The no-confidence vote had been unanimous. Even his staunchest allies had abandoned him, whispering about adaptive governance models and dynamic legal frameworks. Catrix, now interim High Arbiter, addressed the assembly with uncharacteristic warmth. "The galaxy is changing. Perhaps it's time we adapted. Their gaze flicked to Vance. Within reason, of course. Vance raised his thermos in salute. To new precedents, Vance's return was met with parades, honorary degrees, and, inevitably, subpoenas. No fewer than 17 governments demanded he explain how exactly had accidentally deregulated the galaxy. He sat now in a cozy cafe overlooking Geneva, scrolling through news feeds on his tablet. The headlines were glorious. A shadow fell across his table. A harried-looking UN official slid into the seat opposite him, clutching a folder labeled Taxation of Extraterrestrial Meme Economies Draft. "Vance," the official groaned, "do you have any idea what you've unleashed?" Vance took a slow sip of coffee, savoring the bitterness. Beautiful, profitable chaos. Outside, a street musician played jazz, an Earth export, now banned on 7 worlds for causing excessive hip swaying. Somewhere in the cosmos, a conservative arbiter wept into their tentacles. The galaxy would never be the same. The shadowy cabal of conservative arbiters huddled in a dimly lit chamber, their carapaces quivering with indignation. "We must amend the codex," hissed one, slamming a tentacle on the table. "Close the human loophole before," a notification pinged. The youngest arbiter, Zixlith's former aide, sighed. "Too late. The V30 just filed for artistic sovereignty under Article 7X. Their petition cites TikTok dance trends as irreducible cultural complexity." Silence. Then, a single despairing click of mandibles. On Earth, Vance's tablet buzzed with the news. He smirked, tossing a tip to the street musician, now performing a band jazz Catharon fusion, and strolled past a holographic billboard advertising Galactic Shark Tank. The UN official trailed behind, still babbling about meme tariffs. "Relax," Vance said, nodding to a group of teenagers live streaming their first contact unboxing.1 video. "You can't regulate chaos. You can only ride the wave." Somewhere, Catrix, now permanently elected, quietly added Vance's law to the Galactic Codex. Any system attempting to classify humanity will, by necessity, become more human. It was, the archivist noted, the first interstellar law written with an emoji the galaxy had adapted, and it was glorious.